Welcome to the Tank Podcast. In this episode, Fernanda Melchor reads from her book Paradais, a relentless joyride of a novel about adolescent rage set in a gated community in Mexico. Then, the book's translator Sophie Hughes reads from Fernanda's novel, Hurricane Season, a portrait of a small town crushed by privation, frustration, and depravity.
That's why he'd been about to jack it all in that Saturday. Not just because he'd been made to stay until the end of that brag Mickey's party to clean up the filthy dregs, but because of something that had happened to him earlier that day, hours before the piñatas were brought out, when Polo was by the pool, clearing leaves from the water surface with a net, lost in a world of his own, as a whole squad of catering company staff darted back and forth across the garden, setting up tables and chairs and gazebos and even a long, colorful tarp, which, when plugged into a pump, transformed into an imposing, bouncy castle. A formidable thing, with towers and battlements and flags and chutes and even a drawbridge, a colossal yet volatile, ethereal structure that took off each time the breeze blew in from the river, as if it wanted to escape. And Polo was so entertained watching the staff struggle to pin down the castle with straps and pegs, he didn't notice Senora Mariana appear until he smelled her perfume in the air, at which point he turned around to find her standing right in front of him, her body just inches from his, her lips blood red like a vampire's, and her face blushing, missing the trademark sunglasses that instead were hanging from a thin gold chain between her tits. She was wearing jeans, and had something in her hands, a small vanilla envelope that she held out to Polo without a word, stretching her shameless smile even wider when she saw that the boy couldn't take it because he was holding the long pool skimmer in both hands, and eventually slipped into the front pocket of his overalls herself with a giggle and, for your trouble, muttered with false modesty before turning around and sashaying off to oversee the work of her newly acquired maid, a mousy, emaciated-looking girl who in that very moment was clumsily throwing herself into the task of decorating the party chairs with covers and boughs. Polo had the feeling that he knew her, that he'd seen her before, at school maybe, but he didn't dare look for long. He didn't want his employer to think he was looking at her. So he went back to the business of cleaning the pool, feigning composure and resisting the urge to put his hand on his overall pocket and touch the envelope to gauge what was inside, at least until lunchtime came around, at which point he could lock himself inside the security hut's tiny toilet, take out the envelope with his name written on one side in glittery purple felt-tip pen, and gaze at the 200 pesos banknotes contained within it, both crisp and pressed as if fresh from the cash machine. The overtime plus tip, which the idiot Urquiza always cheated him out of, and which Polo moaned about every time he was made to stay late to clean the mess left over from the parties. A nice cash injection, totally unexpected. And he wouldn't have to tell his mother about it either. He could spend every peso on whatever the hell he liked. Cigarettes, obviously, a couple of bottles of Bacardi, and if it stretched to that, some phone credit so he could text Milton to tell him to get in touch. But even as he made plans in his head, excited by the prospect of spending his sudden windfall, he felt an aching in his chest, and moments later he was doubled over the toilet, regurgitating bile in violent, spluttering spasm, and all for having remembered the look on that bitch face as she slipped the envelope into his overall pocket, and the smile that Polo, like some kind of chump, had been obliged to return against his will, unable to stop the muscles on his face from contracting, even though he despised the slut's airs and graces and the barefacedness with which she had touched him. Because frankly, it was 100 times easier to resist the urge to check out her ass when she was jogging around the development in hot pants than to overcome the impulse to return one of Senora Mariana's smiles. She was that magnetic, that enticing, and they'd instantly know what he was talking about if they'd met her in person and experienced firsthand her powers of seduction. Why the hell hadn't he handed the envelope straight back and told her, with every ounce of disdain he could muster, "I don't need your handouts, thank you very much"? Why hadn't he thrown it back in her face and let her know what he thought of her, that she was nothing but a whore, a gold digger who thought that going around handing out her husband's spare change somehow made her more respectable? And why the hell hadn't she just handed him the money like a normal person? Was she afraid Polo would make her dirty, that he'd infect her with his poor hick ways? Did the bitch really think she could buy him, that she bought the right to demand whatever she wanted of him, to humiliate him like Urquiza, to make him wash her white SUV or her husband's sports car? Who the fuck did she think she was?
Tank.
They say the place is hot, that it won't be long before they send in the Marines to restore order in the region. They say the heat's driven the locals crazy, that it's not normal, May, and not a single drop of rain, and that hurricane season's coming hard. Then it must be bad vibes, jinxes, causing all that bleakness. Decapitated bodies, maimed bodies, rolled up, bagged up bodies, dumped on the roadside or in hastily dug graves on the outskirts of town. Men killed in shootouts and car crashes and revenge killings between rival clans, rapes, suicides, crimes of passion, as the journalists call them. Like that 12-year-old kid who killed his girlfriend in a jealous rage on discovering that she was pregnant with his father's baby down in San Pedro Portillo. Or the farmer who shot his son when they were out hunting and told the police he'd mistaken him for a badger, even though everyone knew the father had his eyes on the son's wife. He'd even been creeping around with her behind the kid's back. Or that head case from Palo Gacho, the one who said her children weren't her children, that they were vampires out to suck her blood, which is why she bashed those kiddies to death with planks of wood that she wrenched from the table, and with the wardrobe doors, and even the television set. Or that other miserable bitch who suffocated her little girl, jealous of all the attention the husband gave her. So she just took a blanket and held it over the girl's face until she stopped breathing. Or those bastards from Mata de Pita who raped and killed 4 waitresses and whom the judge let off because the witnesses never showed, the one who'd accused them. They say he was bumped off for being a grass, and those cunts are still out there, like nothing ever happened. They say that's why the women are on edge, especially in La Matosa. They say that come evening, they gather on their porches to smoke filterless cigarettes and cradle their youngest babes in their arms, blowing their peppery breath over those tender crowns to shoo away the mosquitoes, basking in what little breeze reaches them from the river, when at last the town settles into silence, and you can just about make out the music coming from the highway brothels in the distance, the rumble of trucks as they make their way to the oil fields, the baying of dogs calling each other like wolves from one side of the plain to the other, the time of evening when the women sit around telling stories with one eye on the sky, looking out for that strange white bird that perches on the tallest trees and watches them with a look that seems to want to tell them something, that they mustn't go inside the witch's house, probably, that they mustn't walk past or peep through the yawning holes that now mark its walls, a look warning them not to let their children go looking for that treasure, not to dream of going down there with their friends to rummage through those tumble-down rooms, or to see who's got the balls to enter the room upstairs at the back and touch the stain left by the witch's corpse on the filthy mattress. To tell their children how others have run screaming from that place, faint from the stench that lingers inside, terror-stricken by the vision of a shadow that peels itself off the walls and chases you out of there. To respect the dead silence of that house, the pain and of the miserable souls who once lived there. That's what the women in town say. There is no treasure in there, no gold or silver or diamonds or anything more than a searing pain that refuses to go away.
To hear more podcasts from Tank, you can subscribe on all major podcast platforms or follow us on SoundCloud. The theme music for this podcast is by Himera.